Take one, take two, please work. Please tell me hello, hello, hello. So today I'm in the Tower of London, something that haunted the ideas of many, or at least my mind in particular. See, I've been obsessed with the Tower of London since I think I was 12. I never had the opportunity to come until today. So we're gonna cover the history of, well, you guessed it, the Tower of London. The Tower of London. Its building and grounds served historically as a royal palace, as a political prison, as a palace of execution, as an arsenal, as a royal mint, as a menagerie, and a public records office. Everything from royals, tortures, ghosts, beheadings. It has a notorious history that still haunts London. So our story starts here, with the White Tower, that it was built by William the Conqueror in 1066. After he had finished winning a bunch of battles, he decided to come to England and build a structure the likes that England had never seen before, to make sure that while he was away winning other battles, people wouldn't try to revolt against him. And it worked really, really well, because this humongous tower, built with the walls later, was the tallest structure in England. Now it is a little bit less impressive because if you look around, you will see a ton of other castles. So it's not as impressive, but still, imagine seeing that during the Middle Ages. You would have been like, holy crap, can't revolt around against this man, because that is a death wish. Thomas Becket is going to be the first victim we're going to cover. He was a close personal friend of Henry II, and he was christened as Archbishop. However, the two had a massive falling out when Becket decided to side with the clergy instead of the king. He fled to France, but was not quick enough, and the king chased him down and, well, killed him. A few years later, when Henry III erected an inner wall within the tower, Becket's ghost was spotted destroying the wall with a giant cross. This happened again and again. They built the wall and the ghost destroyed it. Finally, a chapel was built for the Archbishop's ghost to appease him, and it worked. The ghost never came back. So it's kind of insane to think about, but the next two victims we're going to talk about had an even more gruesome end. In 1483, Edward IV died, leaving his two young sons to fall victim to the corruption in England. Not even to the corruption within his own brother. So once the king died, his brother, Duke of Gloucester, later Richard III, became Lord Protector of Edward's son and heir, 12-year-old Edward V, and his 9-year-old brother, Richard. They were both placed in the Tower of London for their own protection, but were never seen alive again. It took decades before anybody knew what actually ended up happening to these boys, but eventually two small skeletons were found in a hidden staircase during a renovation. They were found here. So now we're getting to the real juicy stuff. The things that I'm pretty sure you guys ended up clicking on this video for. We're here at the executioner's block. Everyone from run-of-the-mill prisoners to nobles to kings and queens. Let's cover what? Executions. This tower is famous for the executioner's block. Getting executed inside the tower was a privilege reserved for those of high rank. 10 people were beheaded at Tower Green, which stretches to the west of the White Tower. So we're gonna start off with probably the most notorious person that ended up being executed here, Queen Anne Boleyn herself. So we're starting off with Anne Boleyn. She was the second wife of Henry VIII, you know, divorced, beheaded, died, divorced, beheaded, survived. So the very, very first beheading. So Anne Boleyn was one of the most divisive figures in British history. When she arrived to England, King Henry VIII tried to court her as his mistress, but she refused. She wanted a higher position. Henry VIII then left the Catholic Church when the Catholic Church refused to give him a divorce from his wife, Catherine of Aragon. So Henry VIII left the Catholic Church and became the head of the Church of England in order to marry Anne Boleyn. This woman was the reason why one of the most powerful countries at the time became a Protestant country. So 3 years later, Anne was brought back to the Tower, but this time to stay as a prisoner. She was accused of adultery and incest with her own brother, but her real crime was not being able to give her husband a son. You see, the one thing that Henry really wanted was a son, an heir that Catherine of Aragon was not able to give him. One of the many reasons why he married Anne Boleyn, a younger wife, was because of her ability to still conceive. After Anne and Henry quickly became pregnant, it was all bliss at court, until Anne gave birth to a girl that would later come to be known as the famed Elizabeth I, the Queen of England. But Henry's eyes started to wander in perspective of a new bride, someone who could finally give him a male heir. But to be able to get married and conceive again, Anne Boleyn needed to be out of the way. So Anne was executed on May 19th in the year 1536. And so multiple people reported to see her walking around the grounds at night, holding her beheaded head. Quite freaky. So this is probably going to be the bloodiest story about Margaret Paul, the 8th Countess of Salisbury. At the beginning of King Henry VIII's reign, she was in his favor. The king allowed her to become the 8th Countess of Salisbury, and she was also Lady Mary's godmother and governess. But her son, Reginald Pole, spoke out against the king's annulment of his marriage to Catherine of Aragon, and so many of the Pole family were arrested and executed, including Margaret Paul, who was already 65 years old when she was imprisoned before being executed at the age of 67. Essentially, she got on the bad side of King Henry VIII, and so she was sent to get executed. But when she stood up on the executioner's block, she refused to kneel. This made the crowd go wild and murmur and cheer, and it threw the executioner off of his game. So in all the chaos and confusion, the executioner, he swung his axe. He nicked her neck, but actually plunged the axe deep into her chest. Margaret was in shock and fear, and she started to run around the execution block, shouting and screaming, and the executioner was after her, trying to finish her off. It was a bloodbath, and I don't mean to be smiling. It's just whenever there's blood, I get uncomfortable, and so I laugh. But it was truly mayhem. So when the Tower served as a prison, everybody from the very, very rich to the very, very poor ended up staying here. And it kind of varied in what your experience would look like. You could have to deal with torture every day, or you could live in luxury. But when I mean torture, I mean torture. It was not at all pretty. The three main instruments of torture employed at the Tower included the rack, the scavenger's daughter, and manacles. The rack was a device upon which the victims were laid and then pulled slowly by ropes attached to both hands and feet, repeating the racking, increasing the agony. And I really can't even describe the other two. So behind me, you will find the executioner's block. And it wasn't only Anne Boleyn who ended up being executed here. No, 3 queens in total, followed by her cousin, Catherine Howard, and eventually Queen Jane Grey, who only ruled for 9 days. So the story of Lady Jane Grey is actually truly one of the most tragic ones. See, Lady Jane Grey was queen for just 9 days. When Edward VI, a Protestant king, died, there was a plot to make another Protestant successor. Lady Jane Grey was therefore named queen. However, this was to prevent Catholic Mary Tudor from becoming queen. Lady Jane Grey arrived to the Tower of London to prepare for her coronation, but within the fortnight, she was brought back as a prisoner of her Catholic cousin, Mary I, who claimed that the throne was rightfully hers. Mary was reluctant to punish her at first, but Jane proved too much of a threat because of the Protestant plotters intending to replace Mary. So at the mere 17 years old, Lady Jane Grey was executed. Spooky. So now I am in the Beacham Tower, and this is where all the notable prisoners were kept. Everyone from Anne Boleyn, Catherine Howard, before they were forced to, well, be killed. See, so it's kind of weird too, because this place is freaking huge. It's like a whole apartment in New York in itself. So you clearly had space, you had luxury, there's a fireplace. So you're living out your days very, very much content, not like the peasant folk, but also you're just kind of awaiting your child and your impending doom. It's like a double-edged sword. But in the meantime, this is some pretty cool, some pretty nice living. It's in like a nice sized apartment. It's huge. We've got a fireplace. Very, very comfortable. The only thing that's probably not that comfortable is that if you're positioned here, and this is what you're looking at because they don't have TV back then, you're directly facing the executioner's block. So, for example, Lady Jane Grey ended up seeing her father and her husband be beheaded before she was beheaded. So I guess it's not very pleasant to watch. So it's hard to believe, but this place actually served as a fully functioning zoo. And it all started in the 2030s when Henry III was gifted 3 lions by the Roman Emperor. And so he decided to store them here. Except it's not really a good place to store animals because it was very, very cramped, so most of the animals died. But he wasn't the first or the last king or queen that ended up storing their exotic pets here. Everything from giraffes, elephants, zebras, and it even turned into a fully functioning zoo that eventually closed down in 1835 because of all the animal deaths and people deaths and just death in general. I'm kind of slanted at an angle, but there's a myth surrounding the ravens of the tower that supposedly when all the ravens die, the tower will crumble. Spooky. Also, my last name is Cuervo, so it's kind of like we're cousins, because ravens are related to crows. So, fist bump. I don't think it's interested. Sorry, I'm whispering a little bit because I'm in a hostel, so I don't want to be loud. But if you like this video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and move on to your next video, which just hopefully happens to be one of mine. Okay, bye.